Hello, my name is Marco Ortega. I am one of the facilitators in this presentation, and I wanted to make a few points before we begin this video. First of all, this presentation was done as part of the OC Human Relations Social Justice Education Series for Orange County High School students. This virtual meeting was originally held on the evening of May 19th, 2021. As with pretty much all workshops and presentations done at OC Human Relations, there were several opportunities for community building and interaction between the presenters and the participants. To honor the privacy of our participants, certain parts of this presentation have been edited out, including the check-in, check-out, and Q&A section. Your understanding is very much appreciated, and I hope to see you at our next workshop or training. With all that said, please enjoy this recording of Humanizing Immigration in America.
Yeah, but we just asked everybody to remain critical of this poem here, just to kind of consider some of the irony within it. And so we were very intentional with selecting this poem to kind of start us off. So I'll go ahead and read it for us. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land, here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lighting, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep ancient lands your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest toast to me. I lift the lamp beside the golden door. So again, that is our opening. Remain critical of this poem and sort of what the United States, right, is trying to say when they welcome people from other countries, right, particularly immigrants, and how the United States has either upheld that and how they've not upheld that, right? So keep that into consideration and in mind as we kind of journey through this sort of history of like immigration and also trying to humanize, right, the experiences and the stories of folks that have immigrated, right, and what has brought him here. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to, I believe we have, hand it off to Gagandeep, sorry. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gagandeep Kaur. I go by she, her, hers. I want to again thank you all for being a part of this today, and really, hopefully, you all have questions for our storytellers as well. But we want to also get to know all of you that are here and present. So, with that, we're going to do a little check-in. So feel free to unmute yourselves. We can actually just do a popcorn, but we're going to ask you all to share your name and share where your family is from. Thank you all. I'm gonna figure this out one day. Thank you all for sharing all the different regions you are all from and your families from, and it's so beautiful to see the diverse and richness of just this group. Um, and with that, we want to actually go ahead, right? Go ahead and actually share, have our first storyteller share a little bit about their own story and their own story of migration. And it's our very own Don Hahn, who actually works here at OCHR, and I'll go ahead and let him take take the wheel.
Sure. Thank you so much, Kakandi. So good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to be here. As Kakandi, my colleague, share, I am a colleague at OC Human Relations. So my story began before I was born, actually. My great-great-grandfather was the founder of my hometown and my state in northern Laos. They actually migrated from Myanmar to look for sapphire. And when they found there's two little rivers in the middle of our town, literally they were rich with sapphire. So they harvest all these sapphire for the king at the time. And they were granted that piece of land to become our hometown. So after generation of living there, in the early 1960s, there was a conflict in Vietnam between North and South Vietnam, and there was a disagreement of their own government, and U.S. got involved. So when U.S. got involved, we also have our own internal conflict in the nearby country, which is the country of Laos, where I came from. Our government got involved. And I do want to put a disclaimer out real quick, is that I'm not here to talk about political conflict or things that my family and I have no control over. We were part of the war, and unfortunately, we end up being the casualty in the sense of that war, and have to flee the country when the communists took over in 1975. So I actually was born during the war. I was born in 1968, in the middle of the war, really, like at the height of the war. In the 9 years when U.S. fought the war in Vietnam, they also fought the secret war in Laos. And part of that, it ended up, the country of Laos ended up being the most heaviest bomb country during that war. So U.S. have dropped 3.7 million tons of bomb in our country. So with a country of 3 million people at the time. So if you do the math, it's more than a ton per person, right? Long story short, growing up, I witnessed dead body flown by our house. As a kid, I have sometime, before the age of 10, I learned how to go out and push the body away when they get caught in the rock in front of our house. So it wasn't something that you could normalize, when you see things like that. So in 79, after my oldest brother was escaped from the re-educational camp because of the war, the rest of our family escaped. So when we escaped to the nearest country, Thailand, we were picked up by, the soldier and placed us in jail the first night we got to Thailand, because we're entering the country illegally, right, without permission. So they captured us and put us in jail that night. And the next morning, we got admitted to a refugee camp. Before being admitted to the camp, we actually were being interviewed. They want to make sure we were the legit escapee from the communists, right? So our family were interviewed and we got accepted to the camp. And our first camp in northern Thailand, we were there for almost 6 months. And after 6 months, during that time we were waiting, we went through whole different rounds of interview and application. So we applied to go to France. We applied to come here to the United States. And when we were interviewed, my brother was able to identify his former bosses, because my brother was in the army, my oldest brother, and he used to work for American CIA when they fought the war in Laos. So he was able to do that, and right away we got the sponsor. So we got sponsored, and we got noticed that, okay, you're gonna go to the United States. So once we got accepted, they shipped us to another camp, so further south of Thailand. And in that camp, for 3 months, we were supposed to learn the language, know the culture, and know the country, right? So think about like how long does it take for us to learn a different language? They gave us 3 months. So I remember being in that particular camp. They're actually not just Laotian. The first camp was all Laotian, different ethnics from Laos. The second camp, we were living among the Vietnamese community and the Cambodian community. We all were escapee from the communists, from the 3 countries that went through the war. After 3 months, we came to United States. We came to Oakland, California. That's where my family was sponsored to come to. And it was a very tough journey because we didn't speak any English. We didn't know any cultures. And it was a huge culture shock for us. And one of the first things I remember was that was the first time we actually experienced racism. People were telling us to go home, go back to Cambodia. We don't want you here, things like that. So after living in the Bay Area for about 3 years, it was too cold for my parents. And we picked up and moved to Santa Ana in 1983. So since 1983 until now, we've been living in Santa Ana. I first came and I lived in this apartment complex called the Mini Street. So I grew up in Mini Street for a few years before my parents was able to move out and rented a house. And today I went to high school here, went to college here, but after high school, I met my wife, who actually first generation Mexican American, born and raised here in Santa Ana. So we got married. We have 2 kids, and I call them my kid, but they're in their 20s. So my youngest is gonna graduate from college this Friday from Cal State Fullerton. My oldest is already graduated and started working about 6 years ago. I did naturalize myself to become U.S. citizen right after high school because I felt that there's no more. This is my home, right? To be quite honest, the first 10 years of living in the United States, I hated it. I didn't want to be here. People don't want us here. We were strangers. We didn't speak the language. I never have that connection. I always yearn and hoping that I get to return to Laos one of these days. Right after high school, I realized that that wasn't the option. That's why I naturalized myself to become U.S. citizens. And so that's my story. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Don. Thank you for sharing your story. With that, I will pass it to Marco.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Don, for taking the time to share that story with us. We're going to go ahead and jump in, and we're actually going to start off the lecture portion of this by talking about a little bit about imperialism. And so what is imperialism, right? We're going to go with the dictionary definition, which defines imperialism, right, as the policy, practice, or advocacy of extending the power and dominion of a nation, especially by direct territorial acquisitions or by gaining indirect control over the political or economic life of other areas. Broadly, right, it's the extension or imposition of power, authority, and influence. So again, a country having that imposition, like putting in control, right, through their power, authority, or influence over an area. Other terms to keep in mind as I'm going through this section here are the terms, right, manifest destiny, American exceptionalism, white man's burden. Manifest destiny, right, referring to this idea that some of the early colonists, right, settlers had of it's the destiny, right, of Americans to have this land, right, like it's preordained from a higher power. American exceptionalism, right, this idea that people from America are exceptional, they're better for whatever innate reason, right, than others. And this idea of the white man's burden, that it is the responsibility of white people to civilize other individuals, right? And again, a lot of these ideologies, you see them present in the founding of the country. You still see them present in some communities today as well. And so, foundations of the U.S. Just again, a quick and dirty overview. European colonizers, right, come to North and South America. English colonizers settle in what becomes the east coast of the United States. And we see the genocide of the Native Americans. 10 million Native Americans when Europeans first arrive across North and South America. By the 1900s, the population is under 300,000 across North and South America. So again, just completely wiping out the Native American population via colonialism. And so as we're talking, we're going to jump around in time. We're For the sake of time, right, because we don't have enough time to go through everything, we're going to be highlighting a couple of different sections, doing some small case studies. I want to talk about the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, which was signed by President James Monroe, giving the warning basically to European nations, hey, you can no longer colonize or exert influence over the Western Hemisphere. The Americas, North and South America, are off limits to Europe. Any attempt by Europe to oppress or control any nation in the Western Hemisphere would be seen as an attack on the United States. Basically saying, hey, European imperialism, we are no longer okay with it. That's not going to fly anymore. If you do anything, we're going to see it as an attack on the United States. And so this happens, and it doesn't mean the end of colonialism. It doesn't mean the end of colonialism in the Americas, though. The United States engages in these very practices themselves, right? We see it with the Mexican-American War of 1846. We see half of Mexico taken, right, including what is now California, where we are right now. We see the Spanish-American War of 1898. We see U.S. gaining the colonies, right, of Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Guam, and Cuba. We see the annexation of Hawaii in 1898. Again, we see that these practices of colonialism are still happening, right? And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but just an idea that these practices are still happening. The United States signs the Monroe Doctrine and says, hey, this is off limits to Europeans, but the United States is still engaging in these practices. So again, our definition of imperialism, right? I want to highlight the broad definition: the exposition, the extension or imposition of power, authority, or influence, right? And so what we see is that we see that the United States is very much engaging in these practices, right? And so again, not going to go through every instance of imperialism by the United States, but we're going to give a couple of highlights, a couple of situations where that did happen here. So we're going to talk about Nicaragua first, right? The United States and Nicaragua. The United States comes in and occupies Nicaragua from 1912 to 1933, primarily to ensure that they were the country to build the Nicaraguan Canal. Shipping routes, right? Wanting to have control over those shipping routes, the United States gets involved, goes in and says, we need to be the ones that are controlling the shipping route, right? As you all know, right, there is no Nicaraguan Canal. This project eventually ends up getting abandoned, and that's why the U.S. ends up leaving, right? Eventually, other efforts are made in Panama. So Nicaraguans like Augusto Cesar Sandino fought against occupation, and anybody who was fighting against that occupation of the United States, they end up getting labeled as bandits by the U.S. Other labels, right, making them out to be the bad guys. And after the U.S. ends up leaving, once they decide, hey, you know what, this canal is a non-starter, it's not going to happen. A dictatorship ends up coming in, right? Anastasio Somoza Garcia comes into power, and it has the support of the U.S. The U.S. ends up supporting this dictatorship, and again ends up leaving the country in not a great place, right? And again, when we start to think about what are some of the reasons for immigration from some of these countries, right? We want to keep in mind some of the United States intervention and what effect that might have had. Another one we want to talk about is the Guatemalan Coup. The Guatemalan Coup in 1954. So 1944, Guatemalan Revolution topples a military dictatorship that they had. Following this, there's several democratically elected presidents. They introduced several quality of life improvements, including the right to vote for most Guatemalans, land for peasants, and the minimum wage. So all of these things start to get implemented after that revolution in 1944. The United Fruit Company ends up not being very happy with some of these policies that come into place. There's some feelings of being upset that they can't exploit the Guatemalan people anymore because of these new rights that are introduced. And so what ends up happening is that the United Fruit Company ends up lobbying the United States to get involved. And in 1954, the CIA ends up killing the president and installing a military dictatorship. Again, all of this in the name of profits, right? Capitalism. And again, with this, we also see the shadow of the United States in the Cold War as well, right? That some of these things that are happening by the democratically elected presidents, casting the shadow of communism, right? That hey, these are communist ideals that they are also implementing. And again, in the name of that cheaper labor, the United Fruit Company pushes to get the U.S. involved to keep that cheap labor to exploit. One more that we want to just briefly look at is the United States war with Vietnam. Again, involvement by the US. One of the reasons, right, is this idea of domino theory, the belief that if Vietnam embraces communism, other countries in Asia will follow. And so following that war, right, thousands of displaced families, we start to see in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and many of them end up coming to the United States as well. And so with that, again, not all encompassing examples of the United States getting involved in other countries, right? But we wanted to give a little bit of a snapshot. Vietnam in particular is interesting, again, thinking back to that Monroe Doctrine, right, that the United States had said, nobody gets involved in the Americas. The Americas are under our protection, quote unquote. But the reverse does not apply, right? The United States reserves the right to get involved in other countries. And again, we see this happen repeatedly in multiple different countries. Just wanted to give a brief snapshot of a couple of examples here. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Gagandeep to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Marco. And with that, we want to highlight another story today through the eyes and voice of Ihab. And he is, again, grew up in Palestine, born there, and he'll be sharing his story. And take it away.
Thank you, Gagandeep, and thank you, Marco, for that illustrious summary of the effects of imperialism and colonialism as it relates to the United States. Also to Don for highlighting your story as well. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you guys' time and willingness to share. It seems that imperialism and colonialism is actually very relevant to my story as well as I think it is to a lot of people coming from developing countries and coming from what's known as, I guess, the global South. And so my name is Ihab, as I mentioned before. Let me just get this timer going because I can talk forever if you give me the opportunity. So my name is Ihab, and my last name is Tamimi, and both my mother and my father were born in the city of Hebron in Palestine, what's known today as the West Bank. And they were both born, I believe, before Israel occupied the West Bank. This is really, the idea of colonialism and imperialism is really relevant as it relates to Israel, because Israel was established as an ethno-Zionist state to be the homeland of the Jewish people. Specifically, in the majority, initially it was established by European Jewish settlers who were escaping Europe for European Jewish settlers, although today encompasses a lot of people who are Jewish from other parts of the world. However, in order for it to be established, it necessitated the displacement of people who were already living there, being the Palestinian people, and which resulted in a lot of refugees and people being displaced either willingly or unwillingly. Nobody gets displaced willingly, I guess, but they've left because they were afraid. The people who remained were given citizenship at some point as Israelis, but then as Israel expanded to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians that were there remained there, and that's where I come from. They were not given Israeli citizenship, but they were being under control and of a military administration. Basically, they were controlled by the Israelis in a military way without being represented in their government, which is called a military occupation. And so today, if you look at Palestine today, you have almost 4.5 million Palestinians being controlled in all aspects of life by an Israeli occupation in that area, by a government that they are not represented in. And they are taxed, so it's another example of taxation without representation. So my story comes from there. I'm a descendant of that But I came to the United States when I was 2 years old because my dad was seeking to study and get his PhD. And so we're one of the privileged people who are able to actually make it out in that sense. And as I grew up, I realized more and more about what was happening, because when I was 9 years old, I went back to Palestine for the first time and witnessed the military occupation in real time, and witnessed what it meant to be controlled by a military occupation. But again, I am somebody who is privileged because I come from a middle-class family, and I'm in the West Bank. For those who don't know, the Gaza Strip today is actually almost an open-air prison where people have been under siege for the past 14 years. And Gaza Strip is like a 2 by 20 mile strip. And they are currently being bombarded by the Israeli military without a way of them having any defense or any way of escape. But for somebody who, like myself, who lived in the West Bank, I witnessed the Israeli military, and I witnessed the oppression that they inflicted on my people. And so in 2000, around 2000, after living in Palestine for 5 years and experiencing that that environment, my dad came back to the United States, and I was 14. The year was 2001, and we escaped from the Intifada. And I remember, you know, bombs in the distance, and us sleeping on the floor, hoping that nothing happens to us. And then in 2001, everybody knows that 9/11 happened. And so people who looked like me, who spoke like me, who worshiped like me, suddenly became targets of hate and targets of suspicion by people who already didn't understand a lot of what's happening in the Middle East. And so on a regular basis, myself at age 14, not only was I going through cultural trauma, thank you, Google, not only was I going through cultural trauma, but I was also going through a lot of pressure to act as the ideal citizen, and to act as the, like, I'm okay, I'm the peaceful kind of Muslim, I'm the peaceful kind of Arab, I'm the peaceful kind of Palestinian. The media in the United States does not portray what happens in the Middle East specifically, but I think a lot of places worldwide accurately, because it is going through a filter that needs to portray a certain narrative. And so my narrative was unpopular and unfamiliar and unsupported by a lot of people who listened to me. And so I remember in high school, I was just regularly defending myself as a Palestinian, as a Muslim, as an Arab. And I ended up going back to Palestine to finish up high school and lived through another round of that intifada. Every time I went back and forth, there was this like need to code switch and for cultural trauma to happen, which really pushed finally when I came back to the United States for college, it pushed the need to focus on education and awareness. And I was regularly involved in activism where I was telling people about my story, but also just the story of other people, again, who look like me, who talk like me, who worship like me. And so I'm one of the people who are very fortunate and privileged to be able to have made it out. But there's a lot of people who I have a lot of respect for, especially people in Gaza right now, who have they have no choice, and so they have to stay. So immigration, again, I think a lot of times favors the people with privilege and people who have the opportunity to leave. Sometimes people leave because even though they don't want to, as highlighted by Don earlier, but I think at the end of the day, a lot of people would rather stay home. And for me, Palestine is my first home, and the United States is my second home. And I value my people, and I value their struggle against oppression and injustice, against colonialism, against imperialism, against Israeli military occupation, and I support them. And so I'm here to tell my story and at the end of the day, I'm an immigrant too. As and sometimes I see myself as a first generation, Palestinian American. But we're here to tell our stories and to tell people, around us what we've gone through, because as I'm sure a lot of people here know, a lot of Americans are kept in the dark. So I appreciate your time. Thank you for letting me share my story. And with that, I'll hand it back.
Thank you, Ihab. Thank you again for sharing your story. With that, I'll pass it to Marco for our next session.
So next, we're going to be talking about the history of immigration laws in the United States. And so right here, we're not going to look at all of the immigration laws in the United States, but we're going to take a look at a couple of places, a couple of snapshots here. So first of all, we have the Naturalization Act of 1790, which says any free white person of good character who has been living in the United States for 2 years or longer may become a citizen. So again, restricting on who is able to gain citizenship, and there's no basic constitutional protections without citizenship. So if you are not a US citizen, you cannot own property, you cannot testify in court, you cannot vote. Again, many restrictions if you are not a citizen. And again, who's allowed to become a citizen? Only those free white people, right, of quote unquote good character. So a lot of selectivism, right, of a lot of leeway to determine who fits into that mold, right? There's backlash, right, early on to Irish and German immigrants in the US, and that leads some states to actually implement their own immigration laws. And so in 1875, the Supreme Court steps in and says, no, it's the role of the federal government to make and enforce immigration laws. And so they put an end to the state-specific immigration laws and say, no, this is the role of the federal government. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Gagandeep.
Thank you, Marco. Yeah, and so there's some key highlights and moments in our history that are pretty pivotal into sort of the trajectories of a lot of these stories that you just heard, but as well as sort of where this idea of what allows who can become a citizen. So Bhagat Singh Thind, many of you have never heard of him. He may not be in the history books. The only time he'll probably show up is if you're in your first year of law school. Why that is Bhagat Singh Thind was a World War I veteran. He fought for this country, with the US, with the idea that would lead to his right for citizenship. However, he was deemed ineligible, even though as an Asian Indian, he would be technically categorized as Caucasian. And this is actually what he did. So he actually went before the Supreme Court, and it was a huge case, Thind versus the U.S. And he actually, while most in our eyes in today's society, right, most of us would think, I'm going to make the case as who I am as an Asian Indian Sikh man who has fought for this country. I'm going to prove to you that, I am loyal in that sense. He actually turned it around. He actually tried, he was like, I'm going to play their game, and I'm going to prove to them that I am, because I'm of Aryan descent, I am white, and and by science, I am racially white, and therefore I should have citizenship as a white man. Because that was the whole reason, the only reason why he could not get citizenship. And even though racially, by science, he technically is, they actually, the Supreme Court decided, look, we got to figure this out. How do we switch this up? Because technically he's right. So what they actually came back to deny him the citizenship was that under the eyes of the common man, you are not white, and therefore you may not have your citizenship. What was crazy about this was not only did he lose, and this he was actually the first to ask of the Supreme Court. Later on, it was a Japanese American, which you hear a lot. But this actually, there was a lot of consequence to this case, where about 50 Asian Indian Americans who had earlier successfully had received were actually denaturalized. So there was this process of denaturalization in the early 1920s because of this court case, because of this common man ruling. So it's really fascinating to sort of see how the courts, you know, were able to turn that around, turn around their own law, which is crazy. Next slide. So we're going to jump back a little. These are just some policies that we feel are important to highlight within the U.S. The U.S.'s policies on immigration. One of the biggest ones that you all probably have heard if you've been in your AP like U.S. history classes, the big one is the Chinese Exclusion Act. Really, this is the time. So to give you a background, in the 1880s, as America begins a rapid period of industrialization and urbanization, there's a second immigration boom that sort of starts to happen. So between 1880 1920s, there's about 20 million immigrants who sort of arrive. The majority of them are Southern, Eastern, and Central Europe. This is including 4 million Italians, 2 million Jews, many of them settling in major US cities, and specifically to work in the factories. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act passes, which is actually barring Chinese immigrants from entering the US, which is ironic because it was you know, in the earlier times during the earlier building of the railroads, there was a ask and need for many of these immigrants from that region. So beginning in the 1850s, we actually do see some Chinese workers who end up coming into the U.S. But they work in the gold mines, garment factories. They're the ones building the railroads, and they're more agricultural. A lot of Punjabi, Indian, South Asian folks, they go into the farm area, what is now actually Mexico, the El Centro area, as well as Stockton. But it's a very small percentage that are really allowed in. So there's even a story of a ship called the Komagata, which actually ended up not actually being denied a port into the U.S. and then attempted in Canada, in Vancouver, and they were denied and actually left and had to go back. And a lot of these Asian communities had gone to so many countries within Asia to just get to the West. But they were denied. So it was very small percentage groups that were starting to being allowed but there was a lot of hostility within these communities, specifically with the Chinese immigrant community, since they were 0.002% of the U.S. population. Many of the white workers who were there would blame them for having low wages and being able to take that. So 1882, this act is the first in American history to really place these broad restrictions on specific immigrant groups. With that, we get into the Immigration Act of 1891. So this was basically sort of like a new version of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And Marco, please correct me. But it was really focusing on the rules and enforcements for foreigners who were arriving from countries that were other than China. So the first being, so there was basically this idea of, you know, how do we, when those who are coming in, how do we have more enforcement of this law? It was actually during the time of President Harrison, our 51st, the President Benjamin Harrison, who actually signed this particular bill into law. Moving forward into we go into this 1907's Gentleman's Agreement. So the Gentleman's Agreements between the U.S. Was actually an agreement between the U.S. and Japan. So in 1907 to about 1908 represented this effort with President Roosevelt to calm growing tensions between the two countries over immigration of Japanese workers. So there was a treaty with Japan in the early 1890s that had this assurance of free immigration. But as the number of Japanese workers in California increased, there was this growing hostility by those who were here. Around early 1900, the Japan actually agreed to deny passports to laborers seeking to enter the US. So this, however, did not stop the many workers who obtained passports, mainly going through the areas of Canada, Mexico, or Hawaii. And then they would eventually move into the US. So there was this loophole that allowed for that. But there was this agreement within Japan and the US to have these denials. But this racial antagonism continued to grow, and there was many press, as you can see, many and disclaimer again that there is this, that we are aware that there is a slur on this imagery, because of this is from this particular time period, but this is the reality, that there was this much hostility happening. And it got so bad that the San Francisco School Board actually arranged for all Asian children to be placed in segregated schools. And again, this was another moment for really having these moments to being able to more enforce certain immigration policies to certain groups within certain regions. With that, we can move on to the next slide. And then we get into these immigration quotas. So we have what we call the Immigration Act of 1924. This is also known as, was called the Johnson-Reed Act. So it also can be called the Asian Exclusion Act, a National Origins Act. This encompasses many of these particular immigration policies. This was supplemented early as a way to really create a quota of how many members of certain regions and community members could really come. So it was around, I think the quota was around 165,000 for countries outside the Western hemisphere, which was 80%. That was an 80% reduction compared to what was allowed during World War I. So as a result, populations poorly represented in 1890 were prevented from immigrations in like huge numbers, especially, and this was affecting many in sort of the European area as well. So a key element of this particular act was it is the provisions that there was more provisions for enforcement, border control, and really providing funding and legal instructions on how to do quick and mass deportations for immigrants based on these national quotas or the exceeding of these quotas. This act is super important because it really is one of the earlier acts of really the formation of what is the U.S. Border Patrol. And with that, we move on to the history of immigration laws. I think the biggest thing for this particular, I think I want to highlight, is really this idea of the McCarran-Walter Act. And it was really the reforming of some of these obvious discriminatory provisions in immigration law, and really making sure like there was a way to kind of like clean things up for the US to really be able to place certain restrictions. But now they're sort of getting to this point of saying, well, we're going to end these racial restrictions on citizenship, but there's still like this underhanded moments where there's ways to still have those loopholes of still doing racial restrictions on certain citizenships or allowing certain folks to come in. And many of them, again, were specifically Asian immigrants. I think one of the things my colleagues highlighted while we were having a discussion was one of the few that weren't affected were like communities like the Philippines. And that was because they were a colony of the US. Is there anything else, Marco, that I left out?
No, that's good. The only thing I would also want to highlight, right, is again, Border Patrol is established primarily to stop many of the border crossers that at this time were Asian immigrants, right, who were barred from entering legally thanks to the 1924 Act. And again, as we think about, especially today, right, the rise in anti-Asian sentiments, the rise in hate crimes that we are seeing as well, that a lot of these sentiments, these anti-Asian sentiments, are not new, right? They go back, they run deep into the history of this country. And again, many of the original immigration laws that we saw were specifically targeting the Asian community. And so again, as we think about current events, many of these sentiments are not new at all. And so with that, I'll pass it back to you, Gagandeep.
Thank you, Marco, for those clarifications. And yeah, and with that, we want to bring on our next story, our next and final storyteller, Miriam, who will be sharing some of her experiences coming here, and really, hopefully, we get to hear her story, and hopefully we have some time afterwards. I'm actually going to pass it to Michael. Michael will be assisting Miriam for any interpretations needed.
Aquí mi historia desde que vine de Honduras o de lo que pasé aquí en Gio. ¿Cuál estaría mejor?
Cualquiera de los dos, cualquiera de los se siente más a gusto.
Bueno, voy a decir desde que vine de Honduras. Yo me vine de Honduras en febrero 22 de 1985. La razón por la que me vine fue que apenas tenía 19 años, ya tenía 3 niños, yo me crié con mis abuelitos. Cuando vieron que ya tenía niños, no me dieron el apoyo necesario para darles ni siquiera comida a los niños. Y mi madre estaba casada con otro señor que no era mi padre, y él decía que me daba alimento para los niños, pero que tenía que estar con él. Era un hombre muy malo, y yo salí huyendo prácticamente de ahí. Y me vine para acá. Siempre hemos sido cristianos en la familia. Y cuando pasamos ahí Tijuana, yo no entendí cómo pasé, porque nos pusieron en una iglesia, nos pasaron en un bus, y yo no vi que nos detuvieron ni nada. Y después no supe, y cada vez que migración me preguntaba, cuando arreglé mis papeles, decía, ¿entraste ilegal? Pues yo pienso que sí, porque no me acuerdo, yo no sé.
So, Miriam, déjeme traducir rapidito que ya
ya se me olvidó que era.
Yeah, no se preocupe, no pasa nada, no pasa nada. So yeah, I just wanted to briefly catch up, folks, right, for our non-Spanish speaking folks. So Miriam was sharing that she came in 1985, in February of 1985, and at the time she was staying with her grandparents. And so, Miriam, si nos puede explicar retrasar un poquito para volver a explicarnos por qué se vino o por qué dejó Honduras.
Oh, well, I came to this country because my stepfather, he was harassing me, and he prohibited, ¿cómo se dice? Él le prohibía a mi madre.
Yeah, prohibited.
Yeah, prohibited my mother to give me a food or give me food to my little kids, because always he said that I had to be obedient to him. And I didn't want it. I don't see that was right. And I see my life was in danger with him, because always he was behind to me with a big machete. That was scary. And one of my cousins told me, "Oh, you know what? You can't live in this on this house with this man. We have to give the kids to the grandmother, and then you and me, we can go to the United States." And at that time, I told him, you know what? I don't know how the United States. I thought all the people nobody speaks Spanish, and I thought all the people speak English. And I told my cousin, how when I live in the middle of the people, we don't know, and they speak English, and we don't know nothing about that. How we want to talk to the people? But that was very interesting in 1985. And also, I hear there is a big river, and I don't know how can I swimming to pass to the United States. And my cousin, he was in the U.S. and the Navy, Honduras Navy. And he told me, "Oh, don't worry. I'm a specialist in rescue people, to rescue people, and we go over there. But the surprise was we came to Tijuana. We don't know Tijuana, but we asking for a church, and we went to a place. And that church, there was some nice people, and they say, "You guys want to go to the other side? This is the other side." And I say, "Yeah, the United States." Okay, we went to we get into the bus, and we passed, and they leave us in San Diego. And from San Diego, yeah, we started looking for a job, but it was very hard in the beginning because I was taken for a lady. I was taken by a lady, and she took me to a place called Monroe Bay. Actually, I don't know what is Monroe Bay now, and I was working the field, and she used to give me $20 every week, and she told me that was my salary. I used to sleeping on the floor by the stove, and every morning I had, when I asked him for a shower, she always told me I had to shower outside with the cold water, and it was hard. I working like 7 months like a slave until someone from Guatemala, that was a nice girl, she told me that she's gonna bring me to Santa Ana, and she's gonna help me to find out a job, the that I could get paid. The pay, what is what is the pay? Exactly what I had to make it, but not $20 by week. And then that was a big problem because well, in my case, I'm coming very ignorant from my country because I didn't know nothing. When in the 1986, when I tried to fix my situation with immigration, I told my friend, take me with a lady that she gave me a job. She can give me a letter, that's the lawyer say, and then I can have a green card. I went to the house, the lady, she gave me the letter, and I get a work permit because I applied through by the field, that's the campo, el campo, by the field. But 10 years later, I got denied, but I didn't know why I got denied because I didn't know nothing about the immigration law. And also, I just got the letter and I thought it was something else. And also, I couldn't read very well too in English. And the letter say that my name, it didn't appear on the foreman list, the farmers workers. It was only the lady's daddy, not my name. And then I got denied. And then I applied for TPS. And because in Honduras there was happening something in Hurricane Mish in 1998. And I did apply for TPS, and I lived like that until 2009. 2009, I had a problem in my business. I had my own business. Well, after that, I went to the school and I became a real estate broker, and I made my own business. I have everything beautiful in my life. I work just for my 9 kids because I have 9 kids. and I'm working very well, but I give a job to someone, and that person committed something in my business, and I found out 4 years later, and I got arrested. And when I got arrested, my mind went blank because it was so hard for me because I was thinking, who gonna take care of my kids, who gonna feed my kids, everything, who gonna pay the house for my kids, and my kids, that's my world, my whole world, my life. but I could defend myself. I just remember that I told the judge, please, my case is a real estate, it's a white collar crime. Why you don't know? Why I don't have a real estate lawyer? He didn't know nothing. He always they make a question to him, and always he answered, I'm gonna find out later for the next hearing. For the next hearing, he never did nothing, and I got sentenced. And I told the lawyer they sentenced me to prison, and always he said, "Oh, don't worry, you go home." When? Later. Always he told me later, later. Wow. I went to prison. When I was released from prison, they ICE they took me. They was waiting for me. They took me to Adelanto. As Adelanto, you know, is a ICE detention center, right? Immigration ICE detention center. I was there almost a year and a half, and I thought a prison that was the worst place in the whole world, but no, the worst place is Geo. Geo, that's the worst place in the air. If you want to, in that place in Geo, if you want to water, we had to beg it to the officer. Okay, will you please bring water? Because they put a like a little jars. They fill it 2 jars of water for over 100 and something people, and we had to beg it for water, paper, for toilet paper. Actually, we had to. It's very sad, the place, to wake up every morning to see the 4 walls only, the door closed. We can see the light. It was terrible. The food that was expired, and the milk was expired like months ago. And when we asking for a milk, and I remember one time that I told one of the officer, Miss Berry. I remember Miss Berry, and I said, Miss Berry, this meal is not good. And then she told me, well, that's the only thing that the kitchen has. You guys, you have to drink it. They have no choice. And I said, no, Miss Bell, we are human beings. We are here. I know I committed a mistake, but that doesn't mean they're not gonna have right to eat food, no expired food. But the officers right there, they don't care the people. They do care the check, because when they started the COVID last year, they worry. They very worried because one of the officers say, "Oh, they're not gonna bring more people due to COVID. I guess ICE not gonna arrest the people. We need to have a fill it out this place. We need more people. Because more people, that mean more money, and I can make it overtime." I talked with that office and I say, how can you talk to like that? We are a human being. Any person coming here is a human being. How do you guys make a profits? Do you see this the suffering of this woman? Because many women, they crying day and night. They ask him to go to the psychology because they think they become crazy. It is too many things. And when I ask him, sometimes I say, I need to see the doctor because my case is a little delicate, because in prison I had an accident, and I got a surgery in my right knee. When I got my surgery, doctor told me the officer, they referred me too late. They referred me too late to him, and that means after my surgery, I developed arthritis. when they started giving a treatment for arthritis, the med for arthritis, the side effect hurt my liver, and I got cirrhosis, liver cirrhosis. When the ICE lady was in prison waiting for me in my release day, I told her the medical things, medical problems that I have, and she told me, oh, it's okay. And she said, sign this paper, and I signed it. And I found out later that she put in the paper, she wrote in the paper that I'm in good condition, that I had no medical problems. When I arrived to Geo, I told the lady all the things that I have, and then she said, why they bring people like you right here? Because she said she was supposed to go to Geo because they don't have no medicals. Every time that I ask him for my med, they give me my first treatment for arthritis 11 months later. After 11 months later, they needed nothing, and it was too painful every day because there is no insulation by the walls, and everything is so cold. It's super cold, and for my bones. And the doctor always told me, oh, you should have Tylenol with you. Tylenol, take a Tylenol every day. And I told doctor, Tylenol it hurt more my liver. Well, there's nothing right here in Geo, just Tylenol. Geo has nothing. It can't afford expensive medicine for you. And then my days in Geo was like torture. It was a big torture, painful. Every day with pains, every day pain, every day suffering for the food, every day. Oh, also, I worked 6 months free because they say that I had to work. The officers told me, oh, you had to work. You had to do something. Okay, 6 months free. After the next 6 months, they started paying me $1 per day. But they very rude. They wake me out like at 3 o'clock to clean the restaurants. They wake me anytime they wanted to pick up trash. And that was another kind of torture too, because it was too much noise. We can't sleep when there's over 100 people in the same place. And also sleeping like a head to head, the bed very close. And when I try to sleep, they wake me up because they need to clean something or pick up something. And it's very torturous to stay in Geo. But thanks to God, thanks to ACLU, they did a class action, and I was really put through that class action. And thanks to God, now I just had to find out an attorney that can help me to become my felonies and to fix my situation, because I have one of my daughters. She's an ex-Navy, and she made a petition for me, and I got the approval already, the I-130. I got already the I-130 approval, but I can't have the green card yet if I still have the felonies. Now I have to work in the felonies. And it's very sad because when I had to have an ankle brace with me, I still have it. I had 9 months out from Geo, and I had the ankle brace. And that ankle brace, actually, I had an accident 3 days ago. All my stomach is purple because I fell, because it's too big. I fell, and I hurt my stomach because I hit something outside. And was another thing about my ankle brace. Oh, the problem is I have some papers from the doctor. They say they have mobility in farming. Sometimes I have problems to walk. And I told the ICE officer, and she told me that I'm gonna have the ankle brace until I have a core. I don't have a core yet because my case went to the night circuit. Thanks to God, I wanted a night circuit, and I had to go to the lower court, but I guess due to the coronavirus, I don't have a court date yet. But I guess with my history, my life history, I guess I can make a movie, but nobody gonna like it. It's too sad. Yeah, that's gonna happen in my life. What do you think?
Thank you so much for sharing with us. Muchas gracias por compartir su historia. Sí, muchas cosas muy difícil, pero muchas gracias por compartir con nosotros aquí esa historia.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sí, está bien.
Thank
God
you again
bless
for
you.
being a part of this. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, God bless you, everyone. And you guys, you are the best, okay? You're gonna be the best. You are the future. Okay. God bless you, everyone. Bye.
All right. Thank you. All right. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and pass it over to Michael for our next section.
All right, thank you, everybody. So what I'm going to just be going over briefly is just kind of bringing it back a little bit more into like contemporary times, right? Fast forwarding more closer to our present time, right? Starting within the 90s. But what I want to look at is the impact of neoliberalism on immigration. But before I get too deep into that, I want to just go ahead and define what neoliberalism is for you all. So neoliberalism is a set of ideologies that promote individual self-interest, unrestricted flows of capital, and reductions in the cost of labor. And so what does this mean, right? What does neoliberalism mean based off of this definition here? And basically it's this ideology that really centers the individual, right? Promotes self-interest, right? How is something going to benefit me as the individual, right? And it also promotes, right, this piece on unrestricted flows of capital. How is it that we can open up like a free market, right, and be able to have access and tap into different forms of labor, right, at a reduced cost, right? So maximizing our like production value while minimizing our cost of labor, right? So the amount of money that we're spending for people to be actually to do the work that we're paying them for, right? So neoliberalism is an ideology that has been coming up and has been more impactful in the recent decades, particularly because it's really rooted and centered in capitalism, white supremacy, individualism, and some of the other ideologies that we talked about earlier, right? In putting those profits before people, right? Really thinking about how can we make a profit, right? Make a earning off of the work that other people do, right? And this usually is something that impacts, communities of color, right? Maybe countries that have less economic power, right, in the world market, and so things like that. And so this is going to be a really important concept and ideology moving forward and kind of bringing it a little bit into our current times, because what I'm going to be talking about now is a treaty that's called Nafta. NAFTA stands for the North American Free Trade Agreement. And this was a trade agreement that was developed or that was signed back in 1996, I believe, right? So right around the mid 90s. And this is a really important trade agreement because it becomes one of the sort of key things that really impacts the large influx of immigration that the United States experiences during the 90s and leading up until, right, again, our current times. And so let me just go ahead and give you a quick definition of NAFTA. And so NAFTA, the purpose of NAFTA was not merely to facilitate trade and open markets, but to expand opportunities for capital investment. The treaty paid little attention to worker mobility, and its U.S. backers instead insisted on the unilateral right to prevent Mexican workers from migrating through restrictive through restrictive border policies. So again, right, a lot of information there. And what is the connection to neoliberalism? So kind of like what we talked about, right? Expand opportunities for capital investment. So this was supposed to be, right, supposed to be a free trade agreement that was framed as being beneficial to Mexico, United States, and Canada, right? Because now it eliminated borders for companies. So companies could move freely into these three countries and be able to essentially make business, right? And be able to sell whatever product, right? Or have access to that labor market without having to worry about those crossing those borders, right? So it really opened up the border for companies. So when we hear this rhetoric and this narrative of like open borders, right? Certain politicians or certain people of political beliefs, right, or political ideologies will say, oh, well, the left or Democrats want open borders and this and that. But this is essentially an agreement that opened up the borders, right? But the thing is about this trade agreement was that it only opened it up and gave access to large corporations, right? Because then the second part here that it says, and again, going back to the neoliberal ideology, and its U.S. backers instead insisted on the unilateral right to prevent Mexican workers from migrating through restrictive border policies. So when you open up the border to companies to be able to tap into the labor market, right, to be able to sell and make money and profit off of cheaper labor, while you open it up to companies, the border became more restrictive to migrants, right? To people that actually left those countries to be able to come into the United States. Because another one of the impacts of Nafta was that because you have companies that are now entering countries like Mexico and are having access to cheaper labor, that forced a lot of people, right, that had businesses that were working in Mexico. It forced them out of business and essentially forced them into having to migrate. So we've heard a lot today from our storytellers, right, that a lot of the times when folks leave their homeland, their country, it's not because they want to leave, right? Something is pushing them away, right? And it's not necessarily pulling them into the United States as much as it is pushing them away from their country, right? And forcing them into the country that is essentially oppressing them, right? That is taking advantage of them. And especially, right, when you see so much of that around you in your home country, right? It seems almost only natural to be pulled into, again, right, into the country that is essentially taking advantage of your land. And so again, right, I want to really hammer home this idea of neoliberalism, right, and the self-interest of companies and how much more important it has become for the United States to invest in the interest of companies rather than it has been in supporting immigration, right, in supporting folks that are leaving, right, their situations, whether it be due to war, right, whether it be due to poverty or other things like that, right. The United States, right, thinking back into our opening poem, has not been as graceful or as welcoming to certain groups of folks, right, that have fled their countries when it has been beneficial to the United States. And then the last thing that I'll just sort of share about the importance of NAFTA, right, and bringing it even, continuing to bring it into our current times. We'll see a large group of young people, right, that were brought because of NAFTA, right, folks that we now know as dreamers, right, folks that became documented, right, that were brought here without papers, right, that were undocumented. And we'll see them, right, over time being impacted by this trade agreement, right, and they are now adults. And this is a big part of the reason why we see so many dreamers now, right, because they were impacted by a policy like this. And then the other thing that I'll just sort of close with before we transition into a video to kind of, wrap up everything with regards to NAFTA is that with immigration and how we've talked about, our purpose here today was really to try to humanize immigration, right? To really give you that other side of the story, because a narrative that we're seeing that's getting perpetuated a lot, right, is this dehumanization of immigration, right? And this labeling of immigrants as illegal, right? Labeling of immigrants as terrorists, right? And so we see this narrative coming back. And particularly with that language, right, with that framing and tapping into the fear of Americans, we see that happen again with 9/11. And so one of our storytellers, right, had shared how we saw that criminalization and dehumanization of folks from the Middle East, right? And so this was another way for the United States to continue to criminalize and demonize immigration, right? Because now they are taking the fear that the United States was having with what happened with the 9/11, and they were saying, hey, you know, folks from the Middle East are coming in and they're crossing the border, right? They're coming in through Mexico, they're coming into Central America, and that's how they're getting across the border, right? And so this labeling of many folks, right, and particularly with Middle Eastern folks, as terrorists, as criminals, right, as people that are coming to commit harm into the country, has been a rhetoric that is being perpetuated, right? And it is because of, you know, policies, right, that like Nafta, that sort of kind of lit the fire, right, for us to see these large influx and these large flows. This isn't the only reason why people leave their country, right, as we've seen from our storytellers and from other policies. But it's major policies like this, right, that are rooted in, you know, in colonization, in imperialism, and in neoliberalism, right, that are impacting immigration heavily, and that we don't, well, not that we don't, right, but the United States doesn't take a hard look in the mirror at itself, right, and talks this big game of, you know, welcoming folks from other countries, right, as we saw in the beginning of that poem, but then doesn't really quite live up to those expectations that it puts of itself because of policies like this, right, and other harmful ideologies and practices like we've seen. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is we're going to just play a short clip from a documentary called Harvest of Empire. Harvest of Empire is a documentary that was filmed from the book by Juan Gonzalez. Juan Gonzalez is a scholar and is a journalist and a researcher. He wrote the book Harvest of Empire. And so this documentary, if y'all are interested in learning more about immigration and all of the things that we talked about here today, this documentary actually goes very in depth, right, and gives you a much more in-depth sort of history of immigration through sort of the policies and through some of the countries, right, that we talked about here earlier today. So we're going to go ahead and play this short video, and then we'll transition into our last storyteller. So Marco, whenever you're ready.
Called the North American Free Trade Agreement, which allowed commerce to cross borders, but not people. The big companies became richer. So they say, oh yeah, NAFTA's been a success. Yeah, it has been a success for those rich companies. But how about for the people, especially the people on the lower end of the economic scale?
For Alvarez Correa, NAFTA has been a disaster. While the trade agreement opened U.S. markets to Mexican corn farmers, they haven't been able to sell any corn in America. Meanwhile, American farmers have flooded Mexico with cheap corn thanks to generous U.S. government subsidies. As many as 2 million farm workers have lost their jobs. The vast majority headed north across the U.S. border, looking for better pay.
This is our opportunity to provide an impetus to freedom and democracy in Latin America and create new jobs for America as well. It's a good deal, and we ought to take it.
More than 80% of Mexican trade is between U.S. and Mexico. It's unhealthy, such a concentration of trade in the U.S. It's a partnership, but a very unbalanced partnership. That's why, among other things, Mexico began to export people. Lots and lots of undocumented workers going to the U.S. because it was impossible for them to remain in Mexico.
So before we transition again into our next storyteller, just wanted to hammer home some of those points again, right? With NAFTA, right? And I'll flash forward just a little bit too, right? We no longer have NAFTA. We have the CMSC. I forget what the name of it is called. If one of you can help me, but it's we have a new trade agreement that is between the United States, Mexico, and Canada that sort of Trump was able to negotiate, right? But it's essentially the same thing, right? It's still a beneficial policy, right, that really only supports the United States. And as you can see, right, going back to that neoliberal ideology, right, it's really serving the best interest of the United States, right? And when we talk about how this, right, these trade agreements are going to help, right, the countries and this and that, we have to really be critical about, well, who's it going to be helping the most, right? And it really, this was a policy that really mostly benefited U.S. companies, right? And the impact of that then was right, forcing folks, right, to having to leave it. This heavily impacted farm workers, but it also impacted, folks that also had businesses, in their communities, in their cities, in their towns, and things like that, and forced, right, a lot of people to have to leave their country. So, with that, I want to go ahead and present our next storyteller. Our next storyteller is a phenomenal activist. I've had the pleasure of working with her at some of our schools in Orange County, but she has done extensive, a lifetime of work, right, in activism, both fighting for, immigrants' rights, also having a part in advocating for and actually writing the policy that we now know of as Daca. So it's my pleasure to introduce, right, our last storyteller of the day, Susana. Susana's going to tell us a little bit about her work, her activism, and her experience. So Susana, whenever you're ready, thank you so much. You can take it away.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. I am actually kind of away. I have 2 dogs, so my apologies if you hear them barking on the background. So a little bit about myself. My name is Susana, and I currently work for Anaheim Unified, and how the team here presented me. Thank you so much. That sounded amazing. So a little bit about my story. I was undocumented and very afraid back in the 2000s. Being undocumented, as some of you folks might know here, it's not a thing that you share openly, because it's something that comes with a lot of consequences, right? So if you're exposing yourself to people and just folks in general that you're undocumented, you can possibly like face prosecution, from deportation, or just people that don't agree or align with your values. So I grew up in a time where being undocumented was very scary. But I was able to connect and be around folks who were like-minded, and who also, I was very blessed in that sense that a lot of them cared and had that fire to change our reality and change the circumstances that we were living in. So because of that, we started forming different groups within Orange County, and eventually that fire led us to be able to get to the policy that now known as Daca. And Daca, as some folks might know, it's a deferred action for childhood arrivals. That policy was never meant to be the end-all policy. It was just like a baby steps to eventually helping the all 11 million folks who currently live undocumented. So unfortunately, our dream or our goal of being able to expand this policy kind of got stuck because a lot of folks who are my age, we began to kind of be the providers of our family. So, and a lot of us got older, and just life responsibilities kind of pulled us away from the work. So we stopped organizing, but our youth, which is you guys, or you all here, started taking up the the work that we had already laid out, and we see it now, right? Like your generation is so fierce. Like you guys are great advocates on so many issues, and we see it, right? Like us older millennials, like we see the work that you are all putting in, and so it's amazing. And hopefully that same fire keeps going, because we definitely see the passion that you all have, and we see the work that you guys want to do and the change that you want to do, because of unfortunately the previous generations, we didn't leave it so easy for you guys, for you all to be able to fulfill your own dreams and do what you have to do to be happy. So I guess my goal here was to be able to share with you a little bit about my story. So because of Daca, I was able to later adjust my status. So now I'm a citizen, I'm a US citizen. And because I had this Daca status for so long, my heart still feels very undocumented. And, it's a lot of the traumas and the life experience that I have lived in the United States, being undocumented, that it's a difficult transition to accept that now I have this really, heavy privilege in me, that it feels heavy as opposed to feeling light. just because I do know, and I have a lot of people in my life that are still undocumented and have these fears, and so I can't help but also feel for them. Um, so a little bit about me. I started doing activism at a very young age. I started in high school because I needed to find a space where I felt safe. And it started with one of my high school teachers, who at the time was our MECHA advisor. So those were the spaces that I was able to feel safe. And because it was people like myself, or people who spoke my language, and people who I was able to relate to. And at the time, I remember AB 540, which is a law that allows students be able to pay in-state tuition, had passed not too long ago. So at that moment, our purpose was to get this word out and let other students know that even though you were undocumented, you can continue going to college, that there is this possibility for you to keep doing it. Back then, the California Dream Act did not exist. That was another bill that we helped pass. So we were not able to get that, the Board of Governors fee waiver or scholarships, because we didn't have socials. So we were very limited on pursuing higher education. But that's the word, right? We were limited, but it wasn't impossible. So a lot of us had that drive of like wanting to do more. And so we started creating these spaces, these clubs within our schools to be able to move forward. And, and it's really about networking, right? So I encourage you all to start seeking organizations, and if they don't exist, create them, right? Come up with these ideas yourself. And it could be anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be immigration or social justice, or just find whatever moves you. So that's how we kind of started. At least for me, how I got into these spaces was that I really love art, and I'm very artistic. And so then I would start seeing that a lot of the activists, like, they would make posters and banners and go to do banner drops and things like that. So that was something that I really loved, seeing so much colors and all the brightness of things. And so then that kind of led me to like, oh, I wonder how, like, why are they doing this? And so then that's how I started getting involved. And it was just my curiosity of why so much art, or why so much this. And so then I encourage everyone here to start getting curious, like to start hearing yourselves on like why you're pursuing certain things, or why you're pursuing certain careers. I did a majoring in sociology because I wanted to put my little dent in the world. And at the time, like I was very and I still am, I was very passionate about helping people. And so that was my way of like, okay, how can I help the most people that I can help? So that's why I pursued that major. But yeah, so just, I would really highly encourage everyone here to just kind of, sit with yourself, meditate, write, journal, and, you yourself are going to be the person to really know like what it is, where your direction's going to be. And so then I just encourage everyone to kind of listen to yourselves and see like what you're passionate about. And it could be anything, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be immigration, or but so that's how I got involved. That's my little story of how I got involved within the social justice movement. And I'm going to plug in my little commercials of what organizations you should seek out there. There's so many spaces now, because immigration is such an intersectional issue, right? So, for example, the Center OC has their immigration section to it. So it's composed of like community members. It's composed of uh, volunteers. And so then they have this intersection of, if you identify yourself as the LGBTQIA community and you're also an immigrant, they have these bridges, right? Because we're all connected, everything's connected. So that would be a good space if you identify to be able to seek out. Another area that I really support is, they're called Resilience OC. So they're grassroots organizing in Orange County, and I highly encourage you to seek them out. They also have the Rapid Response Network within their organization. So whenever any folks are hearing about immigration raids in the area. They have a whole network of attorneys, community members, volunteers, like either own staff that go to people's homes and, you know, make sure that things are happening within the law. So it's, you know, that's another area that you would be able to explore. Another thing that I would do is I started volunteering at naturalization clinics to help folks become citizens, right? Because there's so much power within our vote, and there's so much power within local politics. So, and even if you're not able to vote, start getting involved and kind of knowing what's going on within your cities, right? There's so many little ordinances that happen that can change your entire life, right? Like politics are very local. So for example, start kind of knowing about funding, like where is your city putting their money at? Like what's going on with, you know, your education, like what's going on with, you know, certain budgets. Like it sounds pretty scary, all these things, but it impacts us directly. And it's so important that we start noticing these things and talking to our families about what this means to us, right? So because a lot of the times when I was undocumented, I knew I couldn't vote, but I knew that I do have a phone. I had a cell phone. I could phone bank. Maybe I can't vote, but I can, you know, call in and give my 2 cents on what's important to me or what values are important to me. I was writing letters to my Congress folks or senators, just letting them know, like, hey, this is what I believe in, and I think you should vote for this. Um, but again, I wasn't voting, but I was, you know, I was doing my civic duty and letting folks know that I am here. I am here to stay. So, you know, make sure that you're voting for things that align with my people, the things that align with folks who are the most marginalized, right? Folks who are the most in danger. And so those are little things that I would encourage you all to do. Um, but yeah, so if you guys have any questions, I'm here, and thank you all for putting this together. It was so amazing just hearing everyone's stories. I had to turn off my camera most of the time because, you know, it was very emotional for me just hearing everyone's experiences. And so thank you so much for being vulnerable and just sharing a little bit about yourselves. And I've appreciated your time. So thank you.
All right, thank you. And yeah, thank you for sharing so much. Again, you've done so much amazing and wonderful work. As was said, we did want to provide a little bit of space here. If there was any questions, again, fountains of knowledge here that we have. If there were any questions, you're welcome to either unmute or go ahead and put them in the chat. But yeah, we wanted to provide that space right now if there were any questions. I think we're going to go ahead and jump forward. Thank you so much, Susie, for answering those questions. We're going to jump to our checkout and asking you all, what is on your mind at the end of our time together? What is still on your mind as we end our time together? What is still on your mind? Go ahead and either unmute yourself or you're welcome to put it in the chat as well. All right, and so with that, thank you, everybody. I'm going to pass it to Gagandeep to go ahead and close us out.
Thank you, Marco, Michael, Susie, and our amazing students who came out and were present throughout all this. And really what I leave you all is with this poem. It's by Rupi Kaur. And it goes, they have no idea what it is like to lose home at the risk of never finding home again. Have your entire life split between two lands and become the bridge between two countries. Thank you all.